Hey everyone, hope you're all well. I'm going to this time start with a plane, and let's make sure we've this all set up. So we go to Preferences, Add-ons, Node Wrangler. So this is checked, cool. And down here we want to add a material there. Let's go ahead and open up the shader editor space. So I'm dragging from there, change this to the shader editor. S underlined. So, yeah, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm gonna add my screencast keys so you can see all my keys right there. And then also we're gonna change to cycles. If we go back to material properties panel, we can scroll down, or let's minimize this so we can get to it quicker. Under settings, click displacement right here. We want this to be set to bump only, or displacement only, so change it from bump only to displacement only. Cool. And so now if we go into top view, we're just gonna work from this. First thing I'm gonna do is identify the overall shape. I'm actually gonna model an Etcher-Sketch right here, so I'm going to get some reference, and we're going to open PureRef, Etch-A-Sketch, yeah. I spelled it right in the description, but it just slipped my mind there. So if I just drag that right there, I can go ahead, and so I'm going to just look at this for reference. So sort of copy those proportions. I'm not going to follow it exactly. Just gonna focus on making nodes rather than just getting it all placed right. So if I go into objects right here, and then vector mapping and vector displacement. So this is we're going to add these two together so that we can scale it while using displacement. And this won't work unless I plug this in the object right here. Use the defaults generated, which will give you different results. Right here, it's another thing to note is we're going to subdivide this so we have enough geometry to work with. And for those top levels, I'll add a subdivision modifier. I'm pressing Control 2 right there. And so if we scale this, we're not getting a change yet. So. And that's because we're just looking at it through a viewer. We need it to be plugged into displacement. So now we have this. And change the mid level to 0, so it's in line with the position of the plane. And we're going to change these to 0 because these are being added to the vector. So the scale is already set here. So this is 0 plus 1. So normally the scale is 1, 1, 1, which it is already here. But we're adding the scale. So just to stretch it out, we bring it out there. And notice there's no gradient to work with right there, so if you were to create stuff from this point on using gradients, you might run into some issues because of that. And so now that we have that shape, let's go into making this overall rectangle that we can use to mask out the borders and create that beveling effect. So for that I'm going to use generated, because generated stretches to the bounds of the shape. And if I use the separate tool and then multiply that at the end, actually we're going to use a smooth maximum. So what that does is when we multiply it, we get a straight edge from the corner. But the issue here is that generated 0, 0 is at the corner, so we're going to shift that over. And since we're looking at this, we can see what that looks like when we shift it over. So we want this at negative 0.5, so to bring it to the center, we're shifting over by negative 0.5 on the x and the y axis. And we don't really care about the z axis, just keep that as is. And then also we want it to mirror on all sides. So to do that, we're going to use another vector node, because vectors, as opposed to math nodes, so math nodes use single values and vector nodes use multiple values right here. So right here we're adjusting 3, whereas math add node is just adding two inputs and then just one value, one value. So it's color versus, same as color versus black and white is also another way to look at it. And right here, so now we have this gradient, right? But if we use a color ramp right here, this range is from 0 to 0.5. So let's multiply these both by 0.5. We're going to do this, and you'll see why I'm doing it in a second, because I want, well, I'll just tell you now, I want to adjust this so that the frame right here, because this is stretched out to the bounds, this part is wider than this outer part, so we want it to scale from the center. But if I adjust this, it's shifting this corner, which we don't want. We want that to run from there. So I'm going to keep these at 2, so that's in range. Then I'm going to invert it, which is with a color invert node, and then I'm going to use a multiply, and then look at this color ramp. So we're going to end up flipping this instead, and actually changing this to smooth minimum. So we're just kind of flip the whole process, getting a similar result, but the difference is we're scaling from the edges. And then if I multiply here, that should scale from the edge point if we follow this gradient. Yeah, so let's make that nice and even right there. I think that looks like an okay proportion, for the, we can spend hours tweaking stuff to make it look good, but just to make something, put it out there, like I'm trying to do, just to, when you're just trying to share the process with people, I just leave it at that. So, yeah, we'll tweak it. No, that's good. Yeah. And with this gradient, so this is the inner frame, outer frame, and I want the deepest part to be the edge, so that part I'm actually going to make black, and then this part is not going to be as deep, so it's probably going to be something like up here, like close to white, but not. And but we won't see what that is until we plug it into the vector displacement. So if I plug this into the height, you can see how that's shifted. Right here we want a flat edge, so plug that in there. And this is definitely too tall. I like to work with this just to block out the differences, but then we can multiply that to adjust the height. We could also adjust the strength here. That would do the exact same thing. But if I'm combining other things, like I'm going to combine these knobs later, I'm going to make that separate. So now I'm shifting that down, and I think just to add another bevel, I'm going to put one in there. There's other interpolations we could use to smooth it out. I'm inclined to use ease, except for the fact that when we do ease, everything is an S curve. So here's a little S between each interpolation point, which won't give us what we want. If we do B-spline, it's a little bit better, but then we're going to need to put reinforcements in here. But hey, why don't we? So I'm going to increase that to white, put it there so that would be a sharp point right there. And also we want to make sure this ground part is totally flat. I can just copy this value, so Control C without even having to click into it, and Control V. Yeah, so there we have that depth. Actually do kind of want to make that a little more subtle. I've actually got an Etcher-Sketch right here, and so it's helpful when you have it on hand, or a 3-dimensional reference as opposed to 2D. It's a lot more helpful. Even 3D models, you have to spend time rotating, and then when you're modeling, you're rotating it in your program. So that's like extra time figuring out the form if you don't have like 3-dimensional models with you. Yeah, a lot of time you just use what you have and what you know. Yeah, you can do a lot from that. So here, this position is important because that's the same as the value where this inner frame starts. So I'm going to use that to mask that out. now that I'm going to start the process of creating these materials. So yeah, so I copied this value, Control C, and I'm going to create this math node. Let's use greater than, and then threshold is going to be the value that I copied, and I'm going to take from that same value. So it's just like the color ramp, except I'm just extracting that one specific value so I can mask this out. So one side is totally white and one side is totally black. That's what less than and greater than does. So I'm going to create two materials right here. Let's just copy this over. And one, I want to be this red reflectiveness of it, and you could pretty much just get that with red, and then I'm gonna, even though you don't see it that much on here, I think it's more appealing when you have a little bit of subsurface. It gives more of an impression of like a cheaper plastic with more hue variation. Like it was originally a yellowish plastic, and then it was dyed red. So subsurface, it's just revealing the colors from the surface from before. We're not seeing the effects here because we don't have the light in the scene. It's only lit by this gray environment background, which let's put something a little more interesting. So I downloaded a texture from this website, HDR Haven, that I've been using for my nodes. The background's pretty distracting, so if I go into here in my render properties and go to film and then click transparent, we don't have to see that in the background. And it's kind of lighting it up quite a bit. So maybe there's, yeah, we can just make it like an orangish, or yeah. Again, I'm not following this exactly, but I'm just doing what I think looks interesting. And then on here, let's try smoothing out this edge quite a bit more. So there's that smooth edge. And yeah, and so let's use this mix shader to combine these materials in the place that we want. So we spent time on the red, let's spend time on the screen. So I mean that pretty much works. You can decrease the roughness because it's a plastic top with some sheen, and then you can yeah, and maybe just make that a little bit more gray. We can also smooth out the corners with the smooth minimum, so this value. And then, you know, if you wanted to smooth these out separately, we could have done this as two separate textures, but for the time that I have, I just thought I'd use it with one gradient. And yeah, and you know, you still get a pretty close effect that people might not notice the difference in the final product. Because they're still going to see this and be like, hey, yeah, that looks like a red TV, you know, or Etcher-Sketch. So, yeah. I think we could, yeah, we could probably even use this color ramp to add some like occlusion into so this darker area. So if I'm just going to copy this value right here and click one of these pegs, copy them and paste that there, and bring that up there. And this part's going to be black. Let's bring that in. If we look at this, we can see exactly where that starts. So right there. So just copy that position, and yeah, so there you have just a little bit of nice occlusion there. And then finally, the last thing we're going to do is create the knobs. And to do that, I'm going to use this object node, and I'm going to use a new one since this gradient one is shot. So if I just move vector mapping node to adjust the position here, and use texture, and we're going to use a gradient right here. And so I press Control-Shift-Click to grab something, then I just add something between that. So then I'm immediately previewing this, and that's helpful. And then so this is a sphere. So you can see this is actually a cross section of a sphere right here. So it's blending onto the sides. So we want to avoid that. We want to keep it on this flat surface right there. And so if we do that, we shift it over, bring it down. And it's important that this is set to texture and not point, because if we scale this, it'll scale with it, whereas with point, it will scale and affect the position at this. So it right here it scales after the transformation, and with point it scales before, and that's the difference between those mapping transformations. So we go into top view to make sure that it's nice and even, just kind of eyeballing this right here. I think I was looking at it upside down, so let's actually put the knob at the bottom where it should be. And yeah, so we'll scale it out. And if we want to just adjust all the scale, we can put scale right after it. So now it's nice and even. Let's just modify that ratio. Okay, so 0.15, I guess it's already square. So because object node, I guess, is even, it's not stretched like generated is. So it doesn't map taking into account the bounds of the object, just the position. So so this origin point is usually always the center point. So if you change the origin point, it would shift this position of the circle. And yeah, so let's shift that over. And I'm going to show you, I'm doing this on positive on purpose because I'm going to show you that if we separate, so we're going to isolate the X and the Y right here. And without the Z value, this is now actually a cylinder, which doesn't really matter so much because we have it on the slope that we want, but I mean, we can see it bleeding over to the edge right here. So we can adjust the scale and shift it over some. So, like so. If we look at this frame, maybe we can, perhaps it should be quite a bit wider so we can allow the space. Let's take a look. So I'd like these knobs to have more room to work with. And if I add a diffuse shader, we can see this right here. So yeah, so I think I want the inner part to be a lot sharper. So I'll just bring this in here. So now if we look at this sphere, a little more room to work with, just position it, scale that out, and then yeah, so just making the cut there, I think. So there's a little smoothing there. Let's clean that up. So this is a full value. This is totally white, so no saturation, total value right here. And so that's the inner part, actually. So we add another white value, bring the value up. We got a flat edge, but let's distance that a little bit so we have a nice rounding there. We want it to be sharp on the edge. And because we have a slight smoothing here, we're not getting some weird artifacts in the corner where things are shifting up. And then, yeah, so we want this to be on both sides, and if I use an absolute value, we can use that to reflect it, where it makes the positives negatives. But the thing right here is that we have this on the positive side, so if I turn this on negative, it's supposed to show on the other side. I think it's because I'm doing this in the wrong place right here. So we want to mirror that before all this happens. So I'm gonna bring these out, just reintroduce them here. So let's see if that's working. Let's see. If we cycle through these, we can see, so axes are flipped. Oh, and then we need the Y value there, so we forgot to connect that. That could be our issue. And it wasn't. So let's figure this out. So we have that position, it's a negative. And then if we separate it first, and then if we just connect this x-axis, we should have two lines on either side. So let's see if we can fix that. So this needs to be absolute value. So we have a line on this side. We need this line on the other side. So if I move this around, let's try. Okay, yeah, so here's the issue, because it's reflecting from this point right here. But we want this mapping node to reflect off of the center. And I think if we use this add node before it, just to show that it's in the center, I guess you could also just plug into the object node. So it should be right here. Separate. Let's try absolute value. So if I look in the sample, it's just this axis is flipped onto the other side, and so now if I look into here, we should see the same on both sides, right? Okay. Hey Kedjart, welcome back. Just saw your message. So if we just like, okay, just gonna redo this. Okay, it might have to do with this mapping node throwing off the vectors, because the position is different from it. So I'm just going to try using generated, just get a similar result. There's going to be stretching according to the bounding box of the object, but I think they'll be okay. So I'm going to change this with Shift S. That's another Node Wrangler add-on, and then another shortcut from the Node Wrangler add-on. And I'm going to change it to a vector mapping node, and then so this will be texture, and so we don't want anything there, and then this, we'll just make these -0.5. So this is actually the center, even though it's not very easy to see. Maybe if we make this one -0.5 as well. But yeah, so if we have this again, and so let's use another gradient texture, spherical. You can see it's in the corner there, so yeah, so we're getting some result. So scale that in. What am I doing? I'm making this Etcher-Sketch. Yeah, so this is day 7 of Nodevember, and yeah, so I'm just making the knobs right here. So I'm going to put this in the corner, and I'm going to reflect it to the other side. So let's make that nice and even, so I'm just adjusting the scaling there, and then just bring that in there. And then let's see if we can manage to flip it this time. If so first of all, we want a vector to work from that's in the center. So if we shift that over -0.5, we're just flipping it over one axis, so we don't need to shift the other ones over if we don't need to. So to get in there, I'm going to let's move all this up. So I'm going to use this gradient texture. So now we have this again in the center because this is shifted over, and then we're bringing it back over here. And yeah, so we want it to flip on the other side. So let's use position. So let's try this mapping right there, and then separate that. That's awesome, but I'm interested in knowing when you just model this to save time. Yeah, I would. This is just like, I mean, yeah, I can model this like, yeah. Nodevember is a really inefficient way to model stuff, but it's monthly event challenge just to see if you can model stuff quickly. If you can use shaders to model stuff. So yeah, and there, and a little bevel, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there, it's pretty much done. Symmetrize. Could bring that out a little more. There it's done. Let's fix those normals. So it's on the outside, and extrude the inner part in. So yeah, definitely that'd be faster. But yeah, no, good question. Check out Nodevember. There's a lot on Twitter. Nodevember.io is the main site for it, and yeah, so that's where you'll find stuff that people done, and a lot of people are doing stuff more complicated than this, but I'm kind of seeing what I can do in like a limited amount of time, and yeah, so yeah, it's just a bit of fun, you know. Well, it's hopefully it's fun. It's like there's kind of a curve to learning it. I'm just kind of trying to show, like, you know, what you can do with nodes in these, and you know, just talking through it. I'm, you know, if you look out there, there's, you know, there's a lot of people who've done a lot more than I have, so. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm probably gonna yeah, sell some stuff on Gumroad, and yeah, I'm still sort of figuring out the best routes for monetizing, but yeah, I guess doing that sooner than later is important. So yeah, so here we have it on both sides, and so position is different from generated because it doesn't take into respect the geometry. Because we scaled this outward, that kind of threw stuff off right there. Yeah, so I think once I get like enough subscribers, I'll start promoting myself more, and yeah, we'll see. I'm just kind of, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think artists should be supported for the stuff that they're sharing, and yeah, so right here I have the height of this, and I'm going to combine that in the vector displacement right here. So to do that, this time I'm going to use a mix because I want this to be totally separate. I don't want to add it on top of it. So I'm going to use this greater than node just like I did with the shaders up here, if you saw earlier in the video. And I'm just going to make that as close to 0 as possible. And well, if we look at this gradient, let's see if that matches up. Yeah, so that's pretty good. And just put in there. We're going to adjust this so that this circle doesn't go in there. So I'm going to scale this in. To do that uniformly, I'm going to add a scale right there. And then I'm going to yeah, so it's combined there. So plug that in, and then so this is displacement will be separate from this. Like if I lower this, it should be okay. So. So I'm not getting this knob here because let's try a different coordinate system. Let's use UV. So this will still flip it along these axes, and we'll make sure that the sphere is flat, so there might be issues with the dimension of it. So let's bring that into 0, 0 space. So now that we're seeing the sphere in the corner, and right there, I'll scale that in. And the flipping right there is working because UVs are 0 to 1 in this direction, 0, 1. 0, 0, 1, 1 up there. So if I scale that, or add it, shift over. So there's the mirror that we've been looking for. So if I shift this over and then mirror it, then I can shift this over later on. And yeah, so now we finally have those. And yeah, they're looking pretty cone-like, and that's as expected because the gradient's going from here to there. And I'm going to adjust that with, let's use curve RGB, so, or Rgb Curves. So that's Shift A to add color, and then Rgb Curves. And so I'll bring that, so if we make this profile flat and then add this section right there. Straight. Is there a extrapolation for straight lines? It doesn't look like it, so I'm just gonna have to insert some nodes pretty close to each other to make them sharp. And so let's actually make that like that. And then this edge, and we don't want this to be so extreme, so let's bring that in there. And here it's looking jagged just because we could use more geometry. So if we turn that up, that's a lot smoother. And yeah, so just the scale first thing, and then so that's something we want. And if you needed to, you could shift it up or down. Like if you wanted to inset it or something, which we don't. And yeah, so now we have the shape of the Etcher-Sketch. That took long enough, right? I hope you found that helpful. And then yeah, so this factor input right here, we can, I just shift right drag, click, shift right click, drag my mouse there to add a reroute node so we can quickly pull values. So we're going to plug this into another shader right here and use this to drive the next different material. Yeah, and yeah, I'm planning to start up a Discord like you suggested. It's just kind of busy with other work and stuff, but yeah, yeah, your suggestions are really helpful, Kedge, so yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so if we turn that up, and then so with that, and let's add some subsurface to it, maybe make it a little yellowish. I can see the effects of that. So there's our Etcher-Sketch. There's plenty more things you could adjust to make it, set it to your liking, but those are the basics on how I'd approach an Etcher-Sketch, and I hope you find that helpful for your own projects and trying things. So like we basically, what we learned is like we can now make a grain of a square from the center, and we can mirror something and then transform it to get this result. And yeah, and then you can control the height of something with either Rgb Curves or this gradient map. And then yeah, and these height maps are really powerful for like if you want to add occlusion. Maybe I'll just go ahead before I go, just use the height in that I'm using from this sphere, and using that in a color ramp right here, and turn the saturation off, bring it up, and if I adjust that, flip that, bring it down. So there's some occlusion there. Let's give it more of a fade. yeah, so there you have it. That's how you do it. So thanks for watching. Yeah, have